Welcome to yet another episode of Indigenization Appreciation Hour. I'm Saurav Jha, and with me is my long-term associate Sriram Tyagarajan. So, India always seems to be on the cusp of destiny, but in this case, I would say it's on the cusp of a decade of tremendous work that lies ahead in the aerospace domain. Of course, even more work will follow if we put in what we need to in this decade. So now one of the main things that, or rather the main program, the flagship program for the Indian aerospace sector going forward will, of course, be the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft Program, which is led by the DRDO controlled Aeronautical Development Agency. And of course, recently you saw that the execution model had been approved by the government. Execution model for the build part of the program, obviously for manufacturing the AMCA, as it were, that was approved recently. But there are, apart from the whole issue of who is going to produce the AMCA, and who's going to produce how much of it, and what is going to be the sort of arrangement under which it is produced, the question of what is going to power subsequent variants of the AMCA is also something that remains to be decided, right? Because see, the AMCA program as it stands at the moment is going to be executed in two parts. There's going to be an AMCA Mark 1 variant, and there's going to be an AMCA Mark 2 variant, right? Both will be fifth generation fighters, but the AMCA Mark 1 will have a near fifth generation engine in the form of the F414 INS6 produced by General Electric. Of course, whether that will indeed be the case or not is also subject to doubt at the moment, since HAL and GE are yet to arrive at a license production agreement for the F414 INS6. And so, in any case, let us assume that at some point that will indeed happen. The AMCA Mark One is slated to see a production run of just 40 units, after which production is expected to transition to the AMCA Mark Two variant, which in turn is supposed to be powered by a fifth generation low bypass turbofan jet engine with certain characteristics. Shriram, do we have that slide where different generations of engines? I mean, the characteristics of different generations of engines are mentioned. Engine
Yeah,
are mentioned. Now, this fifth generation engine, of course, doesn't exist at the moment. The one that will power the AMCA Mark II. The intention and the proposal is to co-develop it with a foreign engine house over a period of some 10 to 13 years. And as of now, it is going to happen through the G2G route by all accounts. Yeah, I mean, it's not something that will probably is going to happen through some kind of competitive bidding. So it's going to be a strategic decision by all accounts. And the main thing that we should note here is that India is yet to select a foreign government with whom it will partner for this program. Now, before I come to that part, let us just go through this slide quickly. So here you can see the broad characteristic, or the key characteristics, salient features of various generations of turbofan engines being depicted here. Low bypass turbofans, of course. By the sixth generation, you come into an adaptive cycle engine, or a variable cycle engine, which we'll talk about quite a bit in this program. So at the moment, we are there in the fourth generation place with the Oh, by the way, our viewers should know that the Kaveri derivative engine has essentially completed flying test bed trials in Russia, and it seems to be working quite all right. So we can safely say that we have, you know, DRDO and GTRE have DRDO's GTRE, the Gas Turbine Research Establishment, which is its marquee lab for all jet engine efforts, has successfully completed the development of a fourth generation low bypass turbofan engine. So, what are the typical characteristics of such an engine? Fan pressure ratio, you know, the FPR is around 3.5 to 4. Of course, in the case of the KD, I think it's 3.4 is to 1 anyway, but whatever, it's still there. Overall pressure ratio 21 is to 30. bypass ratio is of the order of 0.2 to 0.6. In the case of the Kaveri, it's around 0.16. I mean, it's closer to turbojet territory than not. Right? Russian engines typically have had higher bypass ratios. I mean, even so-called low bypass turbofans in the case of the Russians. Turbine blade material is of course directionally solidified usually, and even single crystal blade. In the case of the KD, you see both being used, right? You see DS and you see SCP also. And of course, the propelling nozzle is the typical convergent divergent CD nozzle. And control system is full authority digital engine control FEDEC. In the case of the KD, the Kaveri derivative engine, which was which began in 2017. The program was launched in 2017 as a sort of a follow-on to the Kaveri engine program. And for those who came late, the KD is supposed to power the UCAF, which has also been sort of under design. Can't say under development because that needs to be sanctioned, but of course under some kind of development as well, because a lot of preparatory work and subsystem work has gone on. So the KD is in the 49 to 50 kN thrust class essentially, right? So it doesn't have an afterburner stage. I mean, doesn't have an afterburner at all. I mean, it doesn't have an augmenter. So this is where we are at the moment. What till the for the past 3-4 years the talk has been going to the has been of going to the fifth generation, where the fan pressure ratio increases to greater than 4.5, maybe 5. Overall pressure ratio is in the range of 30 to 35. Now understand one thing, just bare bones I can say. The greater the overall pressure ratio, the lesser will be the thrust specific fuel consumption. So you can have you can have a more efficient engine, right, in terms of fuel economy with a greater overall pressure ratio. Now the bypass ratio is of the order of 0.3 to 0.5. Turbine blade material in a fifth generation engine will invariably be single crystal blade, and it will be usually either second or third generation single crystal blade. Second generation single crystal blade, of course, has rhenium till about 0 to 3%, and third generation has rhenium from 3 to 6%. Okay, say CMS X4 would be a second generation single crystal blade material, and the powder for that is readily available from Canon Muskegon. CMS X10 would be third generation. Rene N6 would be third generation, etc. And of course, in the case of the Japanese, their fifth generation effort apparently has fifth generation single crystal blades, okay, which have ruthenium also and some very exotic proportion of chromium, etc., etc. That's another dark arts area altogether, and requires a lot of proficiency in investment casting. We'll come to that because the Japanese. A lot of people keep asking whether why can't we tie up with Japan. So from what we hear, that door is also opening at long last. So we'll come to that later in the program. So anyway, coming back to the characteristics of a fifth generation engine, your propelling nozzle is of the thrust vector nozzle. Mind you, this is not a fluidic thrust vector nozzle, by the way. And control system is integrated engine and flight control. This is where we want to go. Now, let me just say one thing as an aside. We can get here in 10 years' time by ourselves also. Although there is a lack of, self-belief maybe in the Indian system. But in my view, given that these are the things. So you have six, and then of course fourth generation, and then fifth generation. Japanese have worked on seventh generation single crystal blades also, but at the moment it's as meaningless as talking about a 2 nanometer technology node, in the same way as you used to talk about a 14 nanometer technology node, right? I mean, it's not exactly the same thing. So in that also, when you talk about a seventh generation single crystal blade, you're also talking about something actually notional. Anyway, let's get back to that, because I'll just quickly go to the sixth generation part, because that's going to be the crux of our discussion to the earlier one. So,
Let
so
me get
the
back to it.
so the idea now, the whole thing is, now the whole world, all the big engine houses are all working towards sixth generation engine technology, sixth generation turbofans. And what are the basic characteristics? Obviously, the whole one of the key areas of focus is a much more efficient core. So the overall pressure ratio is of the order of 35 to 45. Fan pressure ratio also is obviously higher, right? Then the turbine blade material to withstand even higher temperatures than 2100 Kelvin. What do you call that? About 2000 degrees centigrade, not thing. And so for that you have to use ceramic matrix composites. So a lot of work has already been undertaken around the world in the major centers, obviously, on ceramic matrix composites. And of course, in the case of GE, you've seen HPT NGVs and even the LPTBs being made of CMCs and being tested on the bench and everything. And then commercial engines, you're already seeing CMC being increasingly used. In India, two programs are underway for CMC. The bigger issue, we have less issues on the component design side. The greater issue is of stabilizing chemical vapor, infiltration technology in India. At the moment, you only have the older chemical vapor deposition technology available, really. So that is a manufacturing thing you have to work on. And of course, the control system has to be far more advanced. It has to be fully intelligent controls. The propelling nozzle will be FTV, will have fluidic thrust vectoring, right? Where the new streams will essentially mix with each other in such a way to achieve thrust vectoring. There are 4 or 5 different ways of doing that. We'll go into that in some other program, but including having different multiple throats, right, at the on the nozzle side. And in the case of the sixth generation engine, one thing that stands out is that it is a variable it is a variable cycle engine, or it is an adaptive cycle engine, where the bypass ratio can be altered in flight, right, in flight, while the engine is in operation. And that is done through the use of adjustable components, right, which sort of vary the geometry of flows. That is the main thing. And of course, there are some basic things are always there, you know like a fan on blade or flayed, the core driven fan stage. This fan stage is driven by the core only, by the high pressure turbine, essentially. Then you obviously have a mode selection valve, and you have those variable area bypass injectors both in front and in the rear. So you essentially, in such an engine, instead of having just two streams, as in the core stream and the bypass stream, you have three streams, right? And that third stream can be used for either augmenting the core or augmenting the main bypass flow. So you have and of course, then at the rear also, you can use that variable bypass essentially for either augmenting the thrust, or augmenting cooling requirements, basically, or for thermal management, or use the flow for augmented thermal management, as it is. So now the idea behind this sort of variable cycle engine, where you adjust the geometric parameters using adjustable components, is that you can get, I mean, not just hypothetically or theoretically, you can actually get much superior efficiency in terms of fuel, better fuel efficiency, which translates into much greater range. You can get superior acceleration if you push more air through the core. You can get greater thrust, that is, you can augment thrust greatly. And also, you can, as such, have a sort of, for the same kind of engine, you can create something which is, you can have a larger airframe around it, or conversely, you can have a, you can sort of have a smaller airframe, because you may need to carry less fuel for achieving the same kind of range. So you can do those things as well. So this is where all the energies of countries around the world, of the major powers around the world, are currently focused. And of course, the leader continues to be the United States of America, because in their case, they never really gave up on this aspect ever. I mean, they've had successive programs. You would remember they had a double. I'll just turn to Shriram in a bit after I complete this. So they actually had a double bypass engine called the YF-120 back in way back, right? And in fact, that was at the end of the program, I'll say what else they tried with that. But so that is what they did, and they have gone through successive programs. They had the integrated high performance turbine engine technology program, all backed by the US Air Force, by the way, and in concert with DARPA. Then that gave away
And
to
NASA.
Advent. Yes, always there. Then it gave to ATIP, AETP, and now they have, of course, NGAP, Next Generation Air Propulsion. That is, of course, for their so-called sixth generation fighter. So they have consistently supported this, and Advent began in 2007, gave way to ATIP, which ran till 2022. But GCAP did not run sequentially. GCAP was running in sync with ATIP, which is a very important point we need to make. So even if we get into some kind of fifth generation program now, which we should already or obviously have already got into, we need to concurrently work on this aspect as well, so that it's not going to be 15 plus 15 years before we get there. It should be 15 plus 5, or it should be 18 years in all, and that is possible with the collaborative efforts underway, diversified supply chain, and the use of, and obviously the advent of artificial intelligence itself for modeling. Anyway, Sriram, your views on all this? I know you have plenty to say, so go ahead.
The issue in our setup is that we start from a low technical base for all of these programs, partly because we've not done what the Americans are doing, or even what the Soviets or the French do things, right? Or even the Chinese, for that matter. Once the Chinese realized that they're behind even us, they said, okay, fine, let's just get cracking. We'll pour a lot of money, get a lot of people, put in a lot of effort, and run multiple programs side by side, and one way or the other we'll have success in any of these programs. Unfortunately, in our system, what happens is this technology development phase, which is key, right? So any product that you build has a lot of building blocks. So it might be design related, it might be manufacturing related, right? So those are your key big, let's say, items to really focus on when you start on any program, right? So the other higher level functions are left to program managers. But even before you start on something as complex as a fighter aircraft or a jet engine, you need readily available technologies to a certain extent. In the engineering and STEM fields, it's called TRL, right? Technology readiness levels. You need it at a certain stage such that you can use that to design whatever you're making, and also have a plan for something that is at a very low TRL stage, say something that is at a lab level system or a technology that can be progressed to all the way to production in a particular time frame. It might be 5 years, it might be 8 years, it might be 10 years, whatever it might be. So you base your design program based on all of these technology readiness levels of things in hand and things that might come in hand a few years down the line, so that you build in enough leeway in your own design so that it can be upgraded or modified, so that something can be removed and something that is better technology can be added in. Saurav was just talking about blades, right, in particular. So there are multiple generations of turbine blades. Each of them is obviously developed for better temperature resistance, higher temperature capabilities, and along with higher temperature capability, you would also look at better creep life, cycle fatigue, crack propagation, how CMAS deposits. CMAS is silica, magnesium, aluminum, calcium, all of these things, which you find in air that goes through an engine, and at high temperatures in the turbine blade, they get deposited or they impact the blade itself and cause damage. So how resistant the blade can be to all of these kind of things. And everybody knows that for a country like ours, which is heavily polluted, and there are so much particulate matter in the air, then you have all of these that have to be factored in to designing an engine so that it has a particular so many thousands of hours of life or hundreds of life for a particular component. All of these are required because the user will have to be given detailed instructions on when to do inspections on certain components inside the engine, when to replace certain components inside the engine, when it has to be overhauled, right? So there are checks after every flight, checks after every month, checks after every 3 months, every 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, right? In any particular engine. So what all needs to be checked and what you need to check for, all of this happens. I'm sure everybody has seen what happened to Go Air, the airliner, right? So they were grounded because the engines failed in the country, and then they had to develop a new chemistry for the blade to tolerate high particulate matter in the air that was going through the engine. And a guy at Pratt and Whitney was rewarded for that also. I can't recall the name of his a name off the top of my head, but this is something that is an ongoing process, right? A company like Pratt and Whitney or GE, or even Safran with the CFM collaboration, they are always working on technology to extract that extra little bit of juice from whatever they're doing, right? It might be an evolutionary thing, and they might also have a longer term program for a evolutionary jump in terms of capability, right? Again, it might be design related, as in how a particular blade is designed with respect to aerodynamics, right? Or even the material, right? So it might give you a better tolerance to flutter, aerodynamic cost, flutter, and better life overall with respect to fatigue, or like I said, better damage tolerance to foreign object damage, or even the CMAS that I was talking about. So every single bit of the whole system is an engineering challenge. It can be aerodynamics, it can be materials, it can be thermodynamics, right? Any of these. It could also be electrical, right? Electronics with respect to control, as to how an engine accelerates and decelerates through various speeds, which affect how resonance occurs and how to skip all of this. So it is multidisciplinary, it needs a lot of effort across a lot of disciplines. So unless you have programs which do fundamental research in all of these things, where suddenly somebody might come up with a new method for manufacturing, a new design, philosophy, or a new manufacturing technique, all of these will obviously feed into your product. So without the building blocks, you cannot build a house. And the fundamental research will continue going on. And then you have research programs going on with specific technology targets for flowing into your product development, which will happen 5 years later. Take the Japanese example for that matter. They had a scaled model of their stealth fighter that they wanted to build. This was in the 2000s, during the 2000s. They had a scaled model of their stealth fighter. They flew it using an engine. They worked out all the challenges with respect to how to build their own fighter. And they did a technology development program for many years. And it's the same thing with their engine also. It was again an F-110 class engine with 110 kilonewtons of thrust on the bench on the first go, right? So, and despite doing all of this, and with the fact that the Americans refused to sell the F-22 to the Japanese, and the whole production having completed very abruptly, they then took a call saying, we don't have the F-22. We've done our own technology development program, but we still do not want to build our own stealth jet and stealth engine on our own. So then they went to the Europeans and said, we will join in the GNCAP program with the Brits and the Italians, right? So now they are a global partner, and they have their own programs, but they're still working together to develop a common baseline and add their own touches to the program itself. They might end up with slightly different versions for each customer, with very heavy concentration of a common base, right? At least that is how it sounds for now from everybody's utterances, whatever they said in public. You have to remember the program is still in its infancy, and technology development the program has not even begun in full flow. So it applies to the fighter as well as to the engine itself. Now, we are trying to do everything on our own. right? Pretty much similar to what the Koreans are trying to do. Obviously, the Koreans have a lot of help from Lockheed Martin and a lot of American companies, but they are pretty much on par with NATO countries in terms of tech sharing. So they are again a not great example for us to consider. We are pretty much doing something unique, right? I'm not trying to equate us with the Americans, but that is what we're trying to do. We want to try and develop everything in house because we want to develop the capability and how, in fact, flows back into the economy in terms of developing capability. Now, having said all of this, where are we in terms of actually doing it? We have high hopes and grand dreams, but are we actually putting money and effort where our mouth is? I would say we haven't done so. Yeah, in terms of taking a leaf out of others' book, I would say look at the Korean program, right? They have de-risked the program. They've done the first tranche does not have an internal weapons bay, but they've built prototypes back to back in very rapid succession, and they've flight tested all of them. They've gone supersonic. They've done in-flight refueling, and they've done weapons firing. All of this, right? So they have a fighter that they can build, and it's already, I think, if I'm not wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it is already slated for serial production. And then they are doing development of the version with an internal weapons bay simultaneously, and that will go into production whenever that is certified and ready for induction into their service. That is something that we should have done 10 years ago, but we dithered and spent money and time, running to Europe and the US and Calspan, DLR and Onera and everywhere, taking our design and telling us, see, this is our new stealth jet we are making. You want all the data? Come, we'll give it to you, right? So we've done all of that because we didn't invest in any facilities here. So we've done all of that, and we finally approved the program like yesterday, and suddenly everybody wakes up and says, oh, your stealth jet will take 10 years to induct. It's like, obviously. Because building a prototype will take 2.5 to 3 years, and DRDO is saying it will take 3.5 years, right? So whatever the challenges might be, so 3.5 years to get your first prototype out into the field, and then from there it will take another 5-6 years easily to get it to any state where there's confidence to start signing deals to begin production. So you can imagine the challenges. And remember, we are hearing, and we have heard even personally, that availability of platforms for testing multiple subsystems in the LCA program itself has been a major issue, right? So if you have a limited number of LSPs on which you have to test various subsystems, if you have certain airframes earmarked for certain aspects of subsystems, right? One fine day, one team would go there and find out that the aircraft is out of commission because it is being torn apart to modify and test something else. Then you come back 1 week later and you test it, and somebody else turns up that morning and says, oh, the aircraft is down for another 2 weeks. Then 2 weeks later, somebody comes and says, oh, there are no pilots to fly the plane because the pilots have been called elsewhere for some other duty. So you cannot have such a system and expect things to go on time, right? So we need multiple prototypes, and all of them need to come serially, but very rapidly. Iteration has to happen rapidly. Learning has to happen. There has to be high availability of test platforms, availability of personnel to fly them, right? As well as all the other infra needed for testing. If we still have to go and say, we do not have an environment test facility for our LCA Mark II and AMCA, so we can't do rain testing, that will not fly. You cannot come in the 2030 era and then say, oh, we were, constrained by lack of resources for a supposedly $4 trillion dollar economy, which is the 4th largest in the world. Such excuses will only lead to conspiracy theories that obstacles are being put in place deliberately to stall progress. Because how can a country which can spend hundreds of thousands of crores on all sorts of schemes cannot fund something that costs 500 crores, right? That's like the cost of a single bridge.
40,000 crores will give us all the facilities we need to progress fifth generation and sixth generation engine technology. And those and the facilities themselves can also be set up in quick double time, because a lot of because the lead time for many of the components, parts and components and subsystems of such a facility can be sourced domestically now. They don't have to be sourced from somewhere else, and we can always get consultants from the relevant countries to set them up very quickly. Once you set them up very quickly, this whole issue of whether we can do it in 18 years time or not, or whether that's a pipe dream, becomes moot. It not really, we can do it even faster than, I would say, because of another reason, because we will not be the pioneers in this technology. A lot of the stuff that goes into both a fifth generation engine and now even a sixth generation engine, okay, has already been developed elsewhere, and the supply chain exists for that, and we are already contributors to that supply chain also, in the form of high performance civil engines right now. A lot of people don't know this, but a very large fraction of some of the most popular, right, engines powering civil airliners today are actually being built in India at the moment.
Trent and
and
Leap engines, yeah.
and getting to ceramics,
Gen
matrix,
X, yeah.
composites is not such a big deal. It's a question of just investing. You can actually get the technology, you can get the expertise also. You see, I'll just say one thing: gas turbine technology in any case is now beginning to peak. Sixth generation technology will probably be the pinnacle of gas turbine technology. Okay, but from the 2040s, 2050 years onwards, you'll see other things beginning to take the mantle, other things which are currently being progressed and which we need to simultaneously progress, of course. But then nothing goes away like that, and you need to. And progressing to the sixth generation will help us in many ways also. Those adjustable those controls that I talked about, which those adjustable components, the kind of materials you'll need for a sixth generation engine, the kind of controls you will need, all of these will feed into the other kinds of engine, air breathing engine technologies that are now beginning to sort of hold their own and enter the fray. They will feed into all of that, and in any case will help you with with a very large fraction of your pool of aircraft, even in the 2060s. So it is something that you should do, and it can be done much more quickly now than it could be done in the past. And like I said, the advent of general purpose technologies like AI, right? AI, data analytics, etc., is itself, and the fact that you will have collaboration ready for yourself, which has the potential to double the resources that can be sort of deployed, especially in terms of human resources for such an effort. You can actually get there much quicker. So, and there is a reason why so many people, apart, I keep aside the Americans because they don't really want to share anything with you, but the French, the Russians, the British,
British.
and the Japanese are now all in the mix for this. And if you see some of the comments they are making, it is suggestive of a turn towards a collaborative effort that looks at sixth generation, that looks at a sixth generation engine, or maybe a 5.75 generation engine, if variable cycle is not the only defining characteristic of a sixth generation engine, in the sense that its OPR and its turbine entry temperature may be in the fifth generation range only, right? Maybe in
But
the
you can
higher
still have a variable
yeah,
cycle engine, yeah.
I mean, turbine entry temperature will still be 2000 Kelvin or something, but you will have that variable, that adjustable geometry, right? Those adjustable components you will have, which are not easy to do. So there will be a huge leap in terms of engine control technologies, right? And right now, as I said, even the Japanese are now interested in this domain. See, they have progressed to something made by Ishikawa-jima Harima Industries, called the XF91, right?
Yeah.
XF9. And that is a pretty state of the art system, effort, if you like. It's in the F110 class. I mean, over 100 kilonewton of dry thrust and over 140 kilonewton of wet thrust and all that. And it uses very contemporary materials, etc. So, but they also want to participate now, collaborate in something. So what we can do is we can have concurrent programs. Now, see, this will cost money, but not doing it will cost even more money and the complete loss of sovereignty, right? Which
like we're facing right now with the 414s.
and
Yeah.
the cost of that is incalculable. So the point is that we have to now ensure that we get into the business right now, and whether it be the French are now also making noises about greater CMC use, and of course variable cycle engine, and adaptive bypass ratios and all that, and the Russians are also there. And we shouldn't discount the Russians either. The Russians have actually progressed sixth generation features as well on their own, and so we need to see what is going to happen there. Because right now we are at the crossroads. We cannot now not take a decision and not take it quickly, but we have to be clear about the kind of decision we are taking now. So these facets have all, I mean, there's a lot to consider for the government, obviously, which is probably why they're taking their time. But I must say one thing, that we don't have that much time left either. Now time has come when we will have to sort of take a decision and
I
go
would
with
say we are
someone.
already quite late, and we should have
We are
had
late. We are
at
late.
least a follow-on program for the Kaveri, where we do a better increased baseline based on whatever tech we've already developed.
We never did that. The follow-on program was the Kaveri derivative engine only. Of course, a lot of things were developed as part of that also. Like you have an IDCL fan, right, which is suitable for a serpentine intake. You have, an advanced FEDEC. You have a TI cast oil tank. You have many features there. You've indigenized many more. In fact, you've indigenized almost all the materials that go into the KDE now. I mean, in
Some
terms
of
of
them
alloys and
still
other
haven't been
materials.
done because there's no scale for production.
Scale is there and all that. And the second generation single crystal blade, processes are also not alien to you anymore. So you've got a lot of gains out of that, and that engine needs to be mass produced, because you see, we must not forget one thing: these things always return more than what you thought at first. For example, I'll give you an example. Now, if you would recall, the F101 was developed for the first version of the B1B, right? The B1A program essentially. And then, of course, that gave away to the B1B, and GE came up with the F101, 102 version. That itself, a non-afterburning version, just like the KDE, is what became the engine of the F118. Of course, a lot of stuff was done on the stealthiness side, and our friend, that Goradia character who gave away secrets to China, was involved in that. And of course, then that morphed into another variant, which was basically the F118-101 that powered the U2R, the last reconnaissance variant of the U2. Okay, so these things keep yielding stuff. So if you progress even a fifth generation engine right now, you're actually going to be at least working on the core of the sixth generation engine, even as you do technology majority programs, feed in programs on the adaptive bypass ratio part, right, on the adaptive cycle part. So you need to now think in those. You need to have an umbrella under which a number of programs will be progressed, because this effort should, like the KDE is obviously already yielding a power plant for a sort of unmanned combat aerial vehicle, right? It can yield something for that. 4 of those can yield something for a bomber as well, right? A bomber, flying wing bomber platform. It can yield it for that as well. You can use it for other purposes. And in the case of this fifth generation thing, it is supposed to yield a whole family of sort of derivatives in the form of a much larger turbo shaft, in the form of a much larger turboprop, a 5000 HP turboprop, in the form of high bypass turbofan engines, etc., etc. So it makes sense to get in now, because now why am I harping on this variable cycle engine business anyway? You see, the air powered environment is going to be such in the 2030s, by the mid 2030s and all. You will need to have a fifth generation fighter aloft for much longer and capable of of greater dash speeds, right? You will need this. You will not be able to manage China's sort of J36 kind of
you have touched upon a
setup.
very touchy subject. The whole point of restricting the AMCA's dimensions and all of it is again, probably born out of the fact that we already had an FGFA in the bag. If not, this should have been a 32 ton aircraft, which would be able to stay aloft for
No,
longer, carry
yeah.
more
So
load.
given that it is not, then the answer is the adaptive cycle engine, right? Which gives you 30% greater range, a much better fuel economy, 30% greater range, and 30 to 40% greater acceleration. So you need to we have to now understand that this variable cycle engine, because we are not really designing a sixth generation fighter concurrently is going to sap all our resources, human resources wise. Okay,
No,
so the
I will add one more point to what you're saying. Uh, Recently, sometime this year, the ADE folks were saying that the current KD is, let's not call it stopgap, but the current solution for the UCAV until we have a variable cycle engine in at hand. Because if you look at the UCAV's role, right, in terms of what it's looked at as an effector, it will have a lot of crews and then a lot of weapons carrying capability. But for any engine, the max demand comes at takeoff. So that is when you need max thrust. And after that, in case of a fighter, when it's doing active maneuvering, dogfighting, whatever you might call it, but the rest of the time, it doesn't spend time at peak thrust. Right. So even in civilian aircraft, I'm sure everybody's felt it, at least whoever is flown, that during takeoff, you have a max calculated thrust set. Right. And then immediately once they start climbing, the pilots pull back on the thrust, which is why you feel like you're sinking, right? You're not climbing anymore. That's because they pull back the thrust to a predetermined thrust level, where it can still continue climbing to cruise altitude. And then once they get to cruise altitude, the engine thrust levels required are a lot lesser, where the aircraft is then tuned for efficient flying, right? And the thrust levels are different if they are looking at making time, but the foremost consideration is fuel efficiency, because money, right? So
of course, you have a different kind of engine being used there also. You have mostly high bypass turbofans, right?
Correct. So
Because
that
for
is where the
fuel
variable
efficiency.
bypass comes into play, where when you're doing something like a long range mission, right? Consider over the IOR, you're not doing a supersonic or a hypersonic dash all the way from, say, Arakonam all the way to Seychelles. You're doing cruise, right? For bulk of the time. So for stuff like that, you would need something that is extremely fuel efficient, because you can carry an equivalent payload instead of whatever fuel that you have saved, because you have a very, very fuel efficient engine. So if you can save 250 kilos of fuel, you can carry an extra bomb. That is how you can relate, right? So if your engine is efficient enough to save 250 kilos of fuel, you can carry one extra bomb or one extra missile if you can save, say, a ton of fuel. For something that big, a ton of fuel is probably nothing. But if you save one extra ton of fuel, you could carry one extra, say, Rudram 3, right? So in terms of effectiveness of the platform, the engine creates so much more leeway if it is more efficient. So they're saying that we'll use the KD as long as the KD is there, and then once the new engine comes online, we will take a non-afterburning version and chuck it into the UCAV, because that will give us greater dry thrust and be better fuel efficient. And if it's got variable cycle, then it'll be even better than something that is traditional type of an engine, right? So, and especially for something like a UCAV, which is going to cruise at whatever is its cruise altitude for a long time before going into strike, or is expected to carry a lot more load than something of that size can carry, then all of these are extremely important. And especially if you want to do deep
Supersonic
strikes.
dash might be a consideration also. Supersonic dash might be a consideration as well. Variable cycle engine. But one thing is there. One aside, the KD, if you add a new afterburner to it, which has also been progressed, can reach 80 kilonewton perhaps. but that's not going to be enough for the Tejas Mark 1A. I mean, that's going to be severely limiting on the operational side, or
Yeah.
if not severely limiting, but quite significantly limiting, because of the much lower thrust to weight ratio than the GFO04 Iron 20. Now the question though is that we have to push the KD into production by all means. At least a production run of 200 engines is required, because that will stabilize the supply chain, the domestic supply chain for jet engines in India, and pave the way for successful development of the fifth or sixth generation engines that we have been talking about thus far. So that is something that needs to be done anyway, and obviously that will only happen if the platform for which it is meant is also progressed rapidly. Right. So that program needs to now be given the utmost importance, as somebody is mentioning in the comment space. Okay, I think we can now move to a few comments, questions, Sriram, I think.
Yeah,
Time for the.
user
And
XA101.
have you
Yes.
projected the QR code today?
Yeah, I will do that now. It was
Yeah.
on initially. So,
Okay, so Sriram is going to put up the QR code. All those who want to show their support
what's up?
for to this program can send them money directly via the QR code. GST will be paid on everything, as I keep
User
saying.
XA101. What are the roadblocks to develop EOTS for AMCA? I do not think there are any technical roadblocks as such, because the quads window for those are already in development. CGCRA is doing it. With respect to the components inside, I think we already have the building blocks for them. We've seen, I think there was a tweet from last Aero India seminar itself on IRD developing multiple types of EO systems, the podded ones under the nose and all. One of them is for UAVs, one for helicopters and stuff like that. So it's essentially the same system which goes into the fighter, just that it's plunked within the airframe itself and has a window to look through. Rangefinder, daytime camera, IR camera, all of those are in progress. We have a program for IRST also for the MKI, as well as the Tejas Mark II. They all have the same building blocks, right? So, which is why if you buy from within, if you develop one system, you can tailor make it for every platform, and you can put in the same system and probably get better performance on a platform which can give you better space, more power, right? So, and that is how systems evolve. So you have one technology, you put it in every platform, tailor make it. So as far as roadblocks, technical roadblocks go, I do not see any, because we are even looking at making a laser designator pod, right? LDP, like the Lightning, that we currently import from the Israelis. So if we can make a pod, we can put the same system within the AMCA itself. There is a plan, and there were tenders out, I think last year or the year before, of modifying that business jet, Virupaksha, that DRDO uses for
Yeah, with an
creating prototypes
EOTS.
and modifying the aircraft and flying with it. I'm sure it is in progress. We'll see
With
it
an
when it's ready.
EOTS is no biggie. None of these things are a biggie, really, which is why the whole thing of, whether the Uttam will make it to the 41st unit or not, along with the ASPAJ, is such a, I mean, yesterday's
Non-issue.
kind of thing. I mean, if it is at all happening, it's actually quite grating, if you ask me. And and
Uh,
eh, and in
yeah.
any case, the Uttam can be used. They can always have the Uttam work with the ELM 8222, right? That's no big deal at all.
Will
And
the
it can,
Israelis accept?
yeah, and it can definitely be ready by the 41st unit. That combination, even if you don't want even if HAL for some reason thinks that the ASPJ won't be ready, but that can certainly be ready. There's no point in using so many ELM 2052 sets, unless of course there are techno-economic considerations which we don't know about, and probably there are that will only become more, sort of, the situation will become only more clear if we get some official statements. Right now we only have some source based reporting to go by.
Yeah, that is not for public debate. Thus, Dubai, can we say Chinese AD is much better and their equipment may actually work better than what we saw in Pakistan, as Chinese have an IADS, whereas the Pakistanis do not. The and Oh hell nah. Okay, his question is sort of like a additional uh, question to the same thing. Can you talk about HQ19 and HQ26 making our MAD capability ineffective? I guess it's just different layers of their AD system. As far as the Chinese AD is concerned, I would say it might be a lot denser than what we see in Pakistan, and there's more depth in Tibet than what the Pakistanis have. We can fly all the way to Peshawar, right? But to fly all the way to Baingolan is a long, long distance. So and to the east also. So it's not easy in terms of number of targets to hit and the depth that we might need to hit, which is why we keep complaining that we need a solid heavy rocket force right away while our fighters numbers increase and however long that takes.
No, that is going to be a key enabler for breaking down the door, given our fighter numbers and the quality of our current fighter pool. And the other thing is, see, I don't see deterrence, nuclear deterrence, really being unstable between India and China as long as India keeps building in numbers. Okay, that is the only thing. It's not on the technology side. The kind of missiles that we have now, say the Agni 5 Divyastra variant, you'll have MIRV, you'll have penetrating aids, you'll have, well, I won't say other things as well, and so on and so forth. And it will definitely be able to penetrate, you know, China's layered BMD. And in the future, see, one more thing we should not forget, in the future, you are also going to see missiles like the K6, right? And those are even more advanced in certain ways. There's no point in going into their features. But I would say one thing, there will come a time, and that day is not very far away, when our country, and this is just my personal opinion, will have to seriously consider something like the Poseidon, right? Alert 6, Canyon. Basically, the old Sakharov idea of having a huge nuclear armed torpedo to create a radioactive wave. And China's development is focused on its eastern seaboard. This is actually something that we must consider. Of course, there are many other issues here. How do you get the thing there? The South China Sea will be full of Chinese sensors. It will have a sensor net, blah blah, and all that. There are other players in the South China Sea. But if you come to a stage where you actually have to use it, then in any case, all bets are off and the world has basically ended, right? But it is not something that we should discount out of hand. Western analysts especially love to discount two Russian systems. One is the Burevestnik nuclear powered cruise missile, saying impractical, has created so many radiation incidents, and in the test range up north in the Arctic Sea, etc., etc. And how is it any more survivable than a standard turbojet or turbofan powered cruise missile, etc. But the point is that it would be very foolish to think that the Burevestnik does not have other tricks up its sleeve to survive. Okay, and its only trick is that it has, suppose a notionally unlimited range and will approach America from some hitherto unforeseen sort of angle of approach. That won't be the only trick it has. It has a lot of onboard power. Okay, there must be many other facets to it that we probably that are not there in the public domain, is what my guess would be. Similarly with Status 6 and Canyon and all that, obviously it's part of a much larger system. In the case of the Russians, there are these submarines that are available, and Belgorod is the first carrier, a modified Oscar class, and now a whole new class of submarines is being built specifically to carry some 6 Alert 6 torpedoes, nuclear powered and nuclear armed torpedoes. So there's huge investments to be made there. But then the question is, you see, what justifies all of this? Ultimately, what justifies all of this is the fact that you should not be in a position where have to abjectly surrender to your enemy, right? That is the whole point. You don't want to do that. You don't want to be in a situation where you move to a first strike, or you say that, okay, you eat up this parcel of land of mine. You don't want to be between these two sort of poles. You want to have a range of response options, and you want to have some measure of escalation control. And ultimately that feeds into the very question of your sovereignty as a state. If you want to be a sovereign state, and I think the state wants to be sovereign, having suffered for having suffered hundreds of years of slavery, you will have to spend money. You will have to get people together to do all of this. You will have to understand that the world is a cold hard place at the best of times, and India's sort of dharmic posture ultimately requires a lot of hard work to underpin it. We will not be an aggressor country, invading XYZ and all that. We If you look at it, people really didn't even want to escalate that much with Pakistan. They initially struck only terrorist targets, and that too because of grave provocation, which is not limited to just the Pahalgam episode. This grave provocation has been going on since almost since the 80s, right? In the terms of this so-called bleed India by 1,000 cuts policy. I won't go further back than that, because then that becomes some more of a sort of politicized view. But at least since the 80s, this has been the policy of our so-called Western neighbor, who's actually an adversary, Western adversary. So it is only now that you are seeing India strike back like this. But India went into what is now Bangladesh, came out of there very quickly. We didn't linger there or chop off parts of Bangladesh, which could have easily been done at that time. So India is never going to become a country like that, but it has to do what it has to do to ensure its independence and sovereignty. This matter can't be emphasized enough. And all of this is going to cost money, unfortunately, which will obviously take away from developmental needs. But then the poor also have a right to security. You cannot have the poor in India being crushed underfoot by the Chinese communists in some future, right? You can't have that either. You have to protect everybody in India, regardless of what the size of their wallet is. So all of these systems have to be put in place now.
Next question. I say multiple questions, right? So Sahil and Gagan, updates on our assets lost during Operational Sindoor and possible case of Indian fighter loss has then again brought out lack of situational awareness and capability shortfall in decision loop. Alibi of rules of engagement seems total BS. Let's take Sahil's question first. Updates on assets lost. See, even yesterday, failed Marshal Munir said we'll still rake up the Kashmir issue, we'll still support terrorism and all of that. So, the government has said Operation Sindoor is not done yet. So, and B, that the goat brains across the border do not seem to have learnt the lesson, or at least in terms of talks, they still continue to say the same things again. So, if we have lost any asset, announcing or acknowledging what asset was lost right now would validate tactics, weapons used, right, which might have brought down any air asset. Do you want to give that kind of information to an adversary against whom you're going to go back and fight very possibly tomorrow? Right. So there are various layers to being an open society and revealing information and owning up to mistakes. Right. Ignore the political side of things. Right. The political side of things of whether or not to actually accept that the hero caught a couple of punches while he bashed the villain is an entirely different debate. In terms of actually providing information to your adversary who has working radars and they could see the aerial picture. If you acknowledge assets and they would be able to pinpoint locations of where these things possibly happened, that could validate whatever tactics, measures, weapon systems that they used. Do you want to give the advantage when you might go and fight tomorrow? This is not like Kargil where, okay, acha, theek ho gaya, you come to Agra, we'll sit and talk, we'll do big, fests and all of that. No. We still in pretty much a very, very ready state of alert. So I do not see the tactical need to acknowledge any assets as of now. If the government says we are done, right, then maybe, yeah, that would be a good time to bring out an official thing. As far as the alibi of engagement, we've seen this even during Kargil where, our aerial assets were told not to cross the line of control. So I wouldn't put it past the government to have place similar, strictures. It happened even during Balakot. Our guys did not cross the border, and they fired Popeyes. So I think the Popeye didn't work on that day. They used spice. So at least that's my view. Do you have anything else? Any different opinion, Saurabh?
Yeah, no, look, as far as Operation Sindoor is concerned, it is an ongoing matter. As far as losses are concerned, it's a question of whether you prosecuted the targets you were supposed to prosecute or not. I'm sure there's a lot of, see, if you go by the statements that have come out, there were adjustments made in those 4 days itself, as far as tactics are concerned, and probably even strategy, to get the final result that we got. Right. So, the strategically, you India definitely won those 4 days as far as as far as the military aspects are concerned. Now, all this talk of narrative management, we know, our narrative management is definitely not the best out there, right? But IH focuses less on the narrative, in fact, very little on the narrative, despite being indigenization appreciation hour. It focuses more on getting, saying what needs to be done, looking at how it is being done, and probably giving ideas on how it could be done quicker, faster, etc. And also looks at what are the prospects for certain things in terms of their utility in the future. So those are the things we look at over here. Because see, ultimately, let's face it, okay, Pakistan may have got support from America and China, both on the military and the narrative front. Military front didn't help them at the end of the day too much. Beyond the point, really, it didn't help them because we did get the better of them. They may have won in the narrative war, but it's okay. It doesn't matter. They're not going to conquer anything by winning the narrative war, really, except make a whole bunch of people in India feel bad about themselves. But that is also going to be a temporary thing. When the next round comes, the damage will be greater to Pakistan, and of course Pakistan will say we'll nuke from the first day itself. The problem is with Pakistan is because it's so lax in strategic depth. Okay, it has to maintain a posture where it has a first strike posture, because the maturing of conventional precision strike and space based ISR has created a scenario where, if you have weapons concentrated in a small protecting nuclear weapons concentrated in a small geographical area is not the easiest thing to do anymore. One thing you do is obviously you try to passively defeat these measures by, or rather, not passively. I mean,
Actively.
you do, yeah, by burying them deep inside, underground mountainous underground facilities, about which I wrote a whole article. So that is something that the Pakistanis have obviously done. But it also sort of, that and a first strike posture and the command and control setup you need for a first strike posture, all of it don't actually come together that easily, especially if you have a situation where you have a recessed or semi recessed kind of deterrence. Of course, now these kinds of words will be used by certain Western experiment analysts to suggest that yes, it is because of India's actions that Pakistan is now going to move away from a semi recessed or recessed posture and is basically going to mate everything at all times, keep them ready, and even delegate launch authority further down the chain or something. Right? This is the kind of stuff
No,
they'll
but
say.
there are enough
But
indications that right from Musharraf's times, with the Americans coming in with PALs, there's a big question mark as to whether their
you
nuclear
know,
assets are
you
even under
you
their
know,
own control.
Sriram, I will not lay too much store by that. Okay, there a lot of water has flown since 2002, 2003. The
Okay.
initial permissive action links were certainly supplied by America, but we don't know what has been supplied by China
China.
subsequently,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And the other thing is, and China and Pakistan have an understanding where they are allowed to use whatever they get from China. There are no real restrictions. I mean, I'm not even convinced that they actually used a PL-15E on India. I personally think it was a non-derated version that they used for during the latest engagement.
Hmm.
So in that sense, we cannot take comfort in any of all this. We must assume that the enemy,
Is on
okay,
all sides.
is capable, and we must be more capable.
Yeah.
That's how we will have to go about it. We cannot, nothing short of that will work. Some intelligence which comes from somewhere saying that Khalid Kidwai की अपने बीवी के साथ झगड़ा हो गया है और वो परमिसिव एक्शन लिंक उसके बीवी के पास है अभी, ठीक है, ये we cannot operate on such premises.
Yeah.
We cannot go operate based on such premises. We have to assume that the Pakistanis know what they're doing on the nuclear front, and we have to keep burnishing our deterrence. I will maintain that the possibility of a limited engagement, especially an air and missile engagement under the nuclear overhang, very much exists. Only the second time it happens, unless we initiate it, it is likely to be a two-front action initiated by our cute and cuddly neighbors. Okay.
Okay. Couple of last quick questions. How true is the report related to Uttam radar for Mark 1A? See, the people are not reading the article and understanding what the article actually says. The radar is actually okay, right? It looks like the EW SPJ pod development has not stuck to the timeline, right? It is taking a longer time. The radar and the EW suite have to work together. They're like one package, right? So you can't have the radar and the EW working at the same time because the EW is looking for radars, right? On the ground or in the air. So they have to work together. So if one doesn't work, the other has to be tailored, or at least the aircraft then has to work both of them together. So if you have an Indian radar and an Israeli pod, you have to mate them together to form a proper picture, right? So then if a decision is taken that we'll have the Uttam from the 41st as was envisaged by DRDO and HAL and ADA and IAF, then you might have to have a separate program integrating the radar and the EW pod, and then you have to talk to the Israelis and you have to see whether they are agreeing to make it work, and if they don't, what will get them to work, and give them some other CBM somewhere else or pay them extra money, whatever, right? So there are all these other considerations, not just technical considerations, when it comes to putting the Uttam on the Mark 1A and having to provide a temporary solution of an existing subsystem on the same aircraft and then replacing it with an Indian version product when it matures and is ready for integration. So there are non-technical reasons as to why the powers that be might say let's just leave the indigenous solution for the 97 and just go with the Israeli solution because it works, and we do not want to wait for the SPJ to be ready and then have a mismatch in between, have 10 aircraft with this Phantom MKized version, and then thereafter having an entirely Indian version, and then you'll have of the 73 Mark 1As, you'll have a zoo again, right? So there are practical considerations to not do it. So the radar itself is the radar set itself is ready. HL was given TOT long back by LRD and all. So that is no longer an issue. The newer version of the radar might need to be flight tested and certified by Semilac, but that should be pretty easy. It's not a developmental issue, right? It's just test flying. I hope that answers the question. Until we get official confirmation, we will just say what is possible, right? As far as the KD is concerned, right? So Upili and Onyx, even Gagan, I think, has the question. Given that KD is nearly certified, how is the RPSA not a strategically more important program than the AMCA? We have all the building blocks ready and inherently less risky than a manned fighter. And Onyx's question is, how good is the DMS-4? Are there plans for production Kaveri to some extent using DMS-4? Why can't we put that in the AL-31 and RD-33?
It's like the AL-31, RD-33, forget about them. They use, especially
Russian stuff and it's
AL-31
contractual.
uses Russian alloys, Russian super alloys, okay, and they are bound by contract. Some of them might be perpetual imports, forget about that. Many are being indigenized also. As far as CMS...
one quick point, right? Sorry to interrupt. I'll just add. the SX making process for the AL31 in the RD33, the GDRE guys and DMRL guys have formulated new processes for better yield
No. So
than
that
the
is the
Russian
case
processes.
when you call something DMS also X4, you're doing the same thing. See, there are two ways to indigenize an alloy. You can straight up copy the process that, in fact, you can straight up copy the process that you, three ways actually. There are three things you can do. You can straight up copy the process done somewhere, especially if it is out of patent, right? You can do that. You just need the need the raw materials in terms of the elements. Second thing you can do is you can come up with a slightly modified patent, slightly modified process, patent that, call it something else, but end up with the same composition. Or you can have a slightly different composition with a different process and get the same properties out of the super alloy, where you'll call it equivalent. Then you'll say ASTM so and so grade equivalent. Okay, that's how you'll go about it. You'll use some global
Yeah, this
standard.
happens with a lot of
uh,
titanium alloys.
so you'll do this. So the CMS X4 is in any case out of patent. Okay, it's out of patent, so it's no biggie anymore. And you're not denied that anyway. Even I can import Canon Muskegon powder if I want. If I can show a manifest and everything, I can import that. It doesn't matter what. I won't do anything with it except keep it as a showpiece. But the point is, it's not a big deal. You see, you import the powder and then you sort of turn it into various forms. First you might have an ingot, and then you can use various processes to create bars and other various forms you can do with it. So on, so forth. It's not such a big deal. Whatever you need for a fourth generation engine, or even a not so great fifth generation engine, you already have. What you need to really work on is ceramic matrix composites, metal matrix composites, and PMCs also, polymer matrix composites. PMCs, of course, also you progress, I think, but whatever. But these are areas on which the yield of your manufacturing processes have to be far superior. And that is where we need to go. Anyway, with that, I think we'll have to bring this particular episode to a close because we've gone over for a time. We are going to discuss more of the same soon. And stay tuned. We had no mic issues hopefully this time, and that in itself is a great victory. I mean, we can't give more excuses like some people probably do, but anyway. So with that, let me just end this. Please note that things are poised very delicately in some arenas, but progress is being made. And somebody said that Shriram is the OG black pillar and I'm supposed to be the OG white pillar. I'm not the OG white pillar. Shira might be the OG black pillar though, because
Always
he's sort of he's the biggest skeptic you'll ever
pessimist
find.
one.
But the point is that progress is being made. We'll have much more to share with you in time, and of course, we'd never share anything which should not be shared. So anyway, with that in mind, stay safe and Jai Hind.
Bye bye.